I follow a lot of discussions about Dark Souls lore on YouTube and Reddit, and numerous times in recent months I have seen a specific narrative emerge. It seems like many people really believe that, within the context of the games, darkness is something universally good for humans, regardless of conditions. And they go on to say that being hollow is the natural form of being a human, and that this is something we should strive to achieve in the wider population, with an Age of Dark. I'm paraphrasing and melding many comments into one statement, so don't get too offended if this doesn't represent what you believe, but I would like to discuss this aspect of the lore, and maybe you will get a new perspective on things. Before we get into the thick of things, I would like to preface this video by saying that my interpretation is not absolute. Sometimes I will make declarative statements as if something was fact, and that's because I do believe in them, but that doesn't mean they are absolutely true. I'm here to offer a new view on things. Specifically, I want to talk about the nature of humanity and hollowing in the world of Dark Souls. Firstly, if you don't want to watch this video, but want to understand my position pretty well, you can watch Vati Vidya's video, Dark Souls Lore Explained. I don't agree with everything he says, and I think some statements are a bit contrived, but the most important conclusions that I agree with are that neither dark nor light are absolutely good for humans, and that hollowing is neither a result of light nor dark by themselves, but rather some sort of interaction between the two. I will spend the rest of the video trying to justify why I believe so. Let's go over a shortened timeline of events, as well as the state of the world and the humanity within. The introductory cutscene can be cryptic and vague, but it tells us many interesting things. First of all, there was a time in the world of Dark Souls where everything was eternally homogeneous. There was no life or death, no light or dark. The narrator calls this disparity, so it's pretty suggestive that no disparity existed before the first flame had existed. Once it did, everything shattered into opposites, and four Lord Souls were found within the flame. But by whom? Good question. I jest, but there are some things we can say about the humanoid creatures in the intro. Firstly, they weren't technically humans, as they did not possess the Dark Soul, or fragments of it. Secondly, they weren't alive either, presuming they had existed before the advent of flame. The reason why I bring this up is to highlight that, in the world of Dark Souls, not everything that looks and acts human really is human, and the same applies to life as well. Regardless, four souls of disparity were found. Nito had the soul of death, the Witch of Isolith had the soul of life, Gwyn found the soul of light, and the furtive pygmy, the Dark Soul. What are souls? In Dark Souls 3, the Firekeeper calls them manifestations of disparity, and I think that might be the best way to describe them. Clearly, not just living things can have souls, Nito being an easy example. So what defines them, if having a soul isn't even limited to living beings? Well, it seems like the most general statement we can make is that they are forces resulting from the disparity in the world. They can create or animate things into doing their bidding and acting in favor of whatever soul this happens to be. Things alive in the traditional sense seem to have souls, or at least some traces of them. Soldan from Dark Souls 2 says they are the essence of life, and that might also be a good description if we take the word life at face value and not in the Dark Souls context. Nito, for example, might be alive in the traditional sense, since we can kill him. I'm telling you this in order to establish that a soul can mean almost anything the writers desire. Anyway, all the four elements of the world had a part in the ensuing war against the dragons. The intro describes most of them, except for the furtive pygmy. He split his soul into fragments in order to birth humanity. Every human has a shard of the Dark Soul within them, confusingly called humanity as well. From the Ringed City DLC, we also know that the Abyss already existed back then. Many of the Ringed Knight equipment descriptions say that those items were forged inside of the Abyss, and the Dragonhead Great Shield goes on to say that these warriors then fought in the war against the ancient dragons as well. However, the ringed knight equipment betrayed a smidgen of life, and that was enough reason for Gwyn to seal away the darkness of early humans. From now on, a ring of fire is symbolic of this. This symbol will appear many more times, so this might just be one of the most important events of the series. Unfortunately, exactly what sealing away the darkness actually entails is very unclear. Regardless, what is clear is that this was an unnatural interference. The consequences could have been negligible or massive for the wider human population, but whatever happens to humans from now on might be a result of this unnatural state, including hollowing, which we will get to later. From now on, when I refer to natural or default states of humans, it will be whatever state they were in prior to this event. It's important to stress the fact that the Abyss had already been in existence at this point in the timeline, which might as well be right after humans came into existence at all. To me, this marks a consistent pattern of humanity being related to the Abyss far more than to undeath. The Abyss seems to be more inseparable from humanity than undeath itself. But we will get back to this later. I would also like to mention at this stage the Dark Hand item. It's heavily related to the Abyss, and the description makes it clear that the art of life drain had existed even in the Age of Ancients. This strengthens the connection between the Abyss, darkness, and the human emotion of want, the significance of which will be explained later. What follows is the Age of Fire, an early Age of Fire, so to speak. But over time, the flames were starting to fade. Gwyn drew his power from the Age of Light, so an onset of an Age of Dark would mean it was now the Age of Men. Therefore, he sacrificed himself to link the first flame, and keep it lit. The linking of the fire by Gwyn is another unnatural blip in the dynamics of light and dark. It is important to note that the previously mentioned sealing of the dark wasn't a part of the story until we got the final DLC for the final game. So the writers probably didn't have this event in mind until at least Dark Souls 3 started development, or even later. Until this point, the linking of the fire was the original first sin, so to speak, the original curse, the original mistake. I think if we squint really hard, we might be able to conflate the two events, but we do know they could not have happened at the same time. The word link is a very odd choice to describe an action of kindling. It seems so deliberately weird that it suggests there must be some deeper meaning to this word. So, what was the fire linked to? I was watching one of Fatih's videos, where he posits that the fire might have been linked to humanity. He also described the aftermath of the first sin as the timeline of fire warping from a straight line into a circle. And then it hit me. What if the fire was linked to itself and to start? As in, the end of the Age of Fire was linked back to its start. It ties in with the theme of a ring of fire and also explains why this keeps the fire in an endless state of flux, without it ever permanently going out. I suppose I should mention that, according to Hawkshaw, at least one undead existed before the fire was linked, and that was Paladin Leroy. The reasoning is kind of contrived, but I understand it like this. Leroy's weapons are described as legendary, therefore legendary weapons were made with titanite slabs, therefore they had to have been made before the nameless blacksmith deity was gone, therefore it had to have happened before the first sin. The more I think about this theory, the less convinced I am that it's true. We are able to wield the very same weapons, but that doesn't mean our character has existed for as long as they have. By the time the first game starts, the undead are everywhere. They are former humans branded by the dark sign, who cannot die. They get resurrected repeatedly, and each death makes it harder to stay sane. What's interesting is that a common interpretation suggests that the undead will eventually reach a point of absolutely hollow, after which they die permanently. This always seemed kind of weird to me, and I would speculate it's mainly a way to explain away permanent NPC deaths. The dark sign is a ring of fire appearing on the human's very flesh. The narrator in the intro makes it seem like this is a direct consequence of the fire's fading. This is the main narrative many characters in Dark Souls seem to believe, that an Age of Dark is to be feared, and it brings along undeath. If someone were to link the fire again, this would cast this curse away and make people mortal again. Anastasia is one example of such a character. Nobody seems to know that humans are creatures of dark. It probably doesn't come as news to you that this narrative is largely misguided, but it really does seem to be the case that as the flames fade, undeath is on the rise. The first game has some of the strongest evidence for my thesis that hollowing is not a natural state of humanity. Humanity items exist in this game as pickups, and we can also get it from slaying enemies. We start off the game as hollow and must use up a liquid humanity at a bonfire to reverse hollowing. When we die, we turn hollow again. I know this might seem trivial, but it's such simple evidence that people seem to just forget about when discussing the lore of the games. The human form is more human than the hollow form, and we must use a humanity, a shard of the dark soul, to achieve this. Therefore, hollowing is a sort of opposite of being human. Maybe not literally opposite, but the states seem to be mutually exclusive. The descriptions for the dark sign item in all the games are not very insightful, but it seems to be a defining feature of the undead. One of the most interesting unresolved questions to me is, are the undead undying because they have the dark sign, or do they have the dark sign because they are undying? Regardless, using the item will effectively kill your character in the game. But the description makes it seem like this is how the dark sign normally operates. It induces death along with the other penalties associated, including becoming hollow. So I would lean more towards guessing that the dark sign is what causes undeath. The symbolism is pretty clear. I think the most obvious conclusion to draw from the dark sign being a ring of fire is that undeath is a result of one of the two possible first sins. But at this point in time, we only had the first game to go off of, so probably the linking of the flame. This further solidifies that the undead are not natural states of humanity. There's a pretty important character in this game which tells us a lot about the past. Darkstalker Kath, the leader of the Dark Wraiths, the one to bestow upon us the previously mentioned Dark Hand, and the cause of two main outbreaks of the Abyss at this point in time, in New Londo and in Ulasil. We even meet him in the Abyss itself. The reason why the former fell was due to Kath teaching the Art of Life Drain to the Four Kings. The fact that he leads a covenant of humanity pillagers and gives us the same right in order to gather more for ourselves conclusively links humanity to the Abyss, even before the DLC had been released. In the expansion, we see the fall of Ulasil due to the awakening of Manus, father of the Abyss. This was orchestrated by our snaky boy as well, and resulted in these horrifying creatures. Presumably, they are citizens from this land corrupted by the wild darkness. Kath has some super informative dialogue. He tells us of the origins of humanity. He tells us that we are beings of the dark, that we should strive for an age of dark, that Gwyn's actions were unnatural. He even tells us that there has already been an age of dark before the first flame was linked. Now, the events at the two main sites of the Abyss lead me to believe that this character is not fully trustworthy, but I do think it's easier to tell what he's lying about than what he's not. Firstly, the two sites of the Abyss that we know of lead me to believe that he is not interested in achieving what is best for the humans. An Age of Dark might be more similar to what we see in Ulasil than a prosperous age for mankind. Despite the Abyss being made from the Dark, I would postulate this extremely controversial conclusion that it's not fucking good for us. Secondly, I don't think a fully fledged Age of Dark was in place. This is because this is literally the only time in the series that we hear of an Age of Dark having been in effect before Gwyn's first sin. However, Kath goes on to suggest that the linking of the flame was a direct consequence of the supposed Age of Dark. So I wonder if he is referring to this short period of waning fire just before the first sin actually happened. This would also explain why there were rare cases of the undead, such as Paladin Leroy, before this time. But if Hawkshaw's postulate is wrong, then this hypothesis of mine could just as well get thrown out the window and this line from Kath might become simply a lie. Furthermore, items related to Manus, like the broken pendant, make a strong link between humanity and emotions. Emotions such as want, longing, fear, rage. Goff also talks about those as if they were results of the advent of disparity itself. Anyway, this trend continues on. Abyssal creatures are characterized by strong emotions, and their past usually involves some kind of strong emotions. For example, these hand monsters in Dark Souls 3 were at some point gluttonous women. Dark Souls 2 doesn't revolutionize our ideas of what the curse is, but it does make some strong revelations about the nature of fire and dark. There are two endings, much like in Dark Souls 1, but they represent different things. In the first game, we could choose to link the fire or become the Dark Lord. In the sequel, the two choices are represented by one ending, and the other one means something entirely different. The default ending sees you enter the kiln, and the Emerald Herald says, once the fire is linked, souls will flourish anew, and all of this will play out again. It is your choice to embrace or renounce this. We can embrace the linking of the flame, or renounce this and become the Dark Lord. They are one ending because it doesn't matter which option you choose, and Dark Souls 3 makes this even clearer. Since the first sin, the first flame has a tendency to fluctuate between light and dark, and never settles on either option. What you choose to do doesn't matter. There is no clear way to get rid of the curse in general, or even to cure anyone of it. Linking the flame might stave it off for a bit, but the shadow will then be even darker. The second ending represents us attempting to leave the cycle and find a new way forward. The most important thing from this game I would like to address is that Aldia says some really insightful things, mostly regarding the cycle of light and dark, but he has one specific line that people constantly quote. Once the Lord of Light banished dark and all that stemmed from humanity, and men assumed a fleeting form. Many people interpret this as humans being both immortal and hollow before the first sin, but I see many other valid interpretations. First of all, there is no real reason to believe that humans were hollow back then. There just isn't. People assume this because being hollow is the only state of humans we are aware of where they are immortal. But what if that wasn't the case? Maybe that's why neither light nor dark are good for us now. Maybe the true state of humanity we should strive for is to be both human and immortal. Secondly, an interesting interpretation of this line is that fleeting form might not refer to the mortality of our bodies, but the fallibility of our minds. As in, the meaning of this monologue is, Gwyn linked the first flame, and then humans started going hollow and losing their sanity. Both of these interpretations are pretty valid in my eyes, and both are contradictory with the assumptions that humans had to be hollow in the past. Regardless, this line confirms what we already know, that the current state of humans is not natural. Dark Souls 3 shakes up a lot of things. First and foremost, we don't play just as an undead. We play as an unkindled, which is significantly different. For example, we don't hollow naturally when we die. The most we can lose is our ember, but that's it. This alone proves that, while we do resurrect, the curse does not work the same way as on regular undead. We still have a dark sign, and the description is as useless as it's ever been, but we get new information elsewhere. There is an entire society in this game built by and for hollows. It's called Londor, and we meet two characters from there. We can find Yoel, who will ask to enter our service. He acts as a vendor for some basic sorceries, but he also has a unique interaction. We can choose to draw out true strength. This will give us one free level of our choosing and sneakily place one dark sigil in our inventory. For every dark sigil we have, we will gain 1 point of hollowing every time we die. This makes no functional difference, but it's important to the story. Yoel will let us get a free level when we reach certain breakpoints based on how much hollowing we have. We can do this a total of 5 times. Then he cryptically says, "All will soon be clear, my lord." The next time we reload the area, he is dead, and Yuria stands next to his location instead. She is in some sort of position of authority in Londor, and she eggs you on to usurp the First Flame, for the sake of all Hollows. In this game, there is a strong connection between the Hollows and themes of deception and the occult. Yuria does sell some dark-related items, like the Dark Hand. When she is killed, she directly name-drops Kath, saying he was failed. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, but the whole thing seems really sus to me. The fact that Yuria appears right when Yoel goes kaput makes it not seem like a coincidence that we met him. She sells items which help you hide your nature, like purging stones or this illusory ring, or items about sapping the life from your foes, poison throwing knives, and the dark hand. She even eggs you on to kill Orbeck, under the pretense that he is vying for being Lord of Hollows as well, even though he's not even fucking hollow. And if you follow through, she gives you the Morion Blade, which bleeds your foes dry. There is a strong connection to Koth, which leads me to believe that Londor is kind of like a New Londo 2.0, but with a side dish of hollow. Let's talk about the Dark Sigil now. Vati conflates this item with the Dark Sign itself, but I think there is a reason those are separate. I do believe there is a reason the developers specifically made a point to make this a different item, with a distinct description. I'm gonna read it in full because it's interesting. A black gaping hole in the flesh that resembles the brand of an undead. The darkness of humanity seeps from this bottomless pitch black hole, the gap filled by the accumulation of the curse. This dark sigil will never heal, but there is a tale told of a firekeeper who returned from the abyss and brought great comfort to a bearer of the curse. The description goes out of its way to bring up that it resembles a dark sign, which I think means that there might be some connection, but it's not the same thing. Later, it says that humanity seeps from this hole, and that this hole was left by the accumulation of the curse. Wow. This says so much, and kind of seals the deal for me, that hollowing is a result of loss of humanity. It seeps from this hole, which means that it must be leaving our body. It seeps from a hole, which is a hole because the curse has accumulated. This description suggests a weird order to things, that apparently the curse comes first, then you become hollow, and then your humanity is leaving you. However, I still believe these things are linked in a chain of causality. That's why you become more hollow when you die, the more dark sigils you have. I think a slightly different order chronologically would make more sense, such as the curse branding you, then you lose your humanity, and that's why you're left hollow. This name would tie it all together with a nice bow, but this doesn't have to be the case for my interpretation to work. The cherry on top for me is that it is possible to heal this dark sigil. You must bring the Firekeeper soul to the Firekeeper. This soul is the same one from Dark Souls 1, which was gnawed on by infinite humanity. And this soul belonged to a Firekeeper who returned from the abyss. This item drenched in references to darkness, is alone able to heal our reason for hollowing. There is a pretty strong connection as far as darkness and Londor go, but it seems to be more in the context of losing your humanity. And then we have the Firekeeper Soul, an item emblematic of darkness, which can heal your dark sigils and stop you from ever hollowing again. You might say that, since we are unkindled, things don't work the same way for us as for other hollows, and that might be true. So you're free to disregard everything we've learned about hollowing from Dark Souls 3. But I think the first two games alone have plenty of evidence for my thesis already. For my final point of interest, I direct your attention to Gale. This man has consumed all of the Dark Soul itself, but it's all dried up when we meet him in the Ringed City. He is undead, he is hollow, he has lost his marbles. He fights like an animal. Then, the blood of the Dark Soul liquefies inside of him and regains its power. And that is the moment that he regains his humanity and fights like a human. This is reflected by the damage some special weapons deal. The Hollow Slayer Greatsword deals more damage to hollow enemies and is more effective during Phase 1. The Wolf Knight Greatsword is stronger against abyssal enemies and it gets its bonus during Phases 2 and 3. I probably don't need to go over it again because the point has been hammered home. I might as well mention this, but I believe we might see, for the first time, a true Age of Dark in this game. I'm talking, of course, about the Untended Graves. I'm not going to pretend like I have some grand narrative that will explain everything about why this area exists and what it represents, but Ludleth's dialogue pretty soundly confirms that this was an Age of Dark in the past, relative to whenever the Bright Firelink Shrine is. And that is the age that was brought to an end when he linked the fire, to bring about light again. It doesn't change anything in my view of the world, but it's interesting that we really get to see what an Age of Dark actually looks like. Let's recap what we know then. Undead seem to appear when the first flame is waning. Linking the flame will temporarily stave off the affliction. A deep affinity for darkness is almost always followed by a corruption of the abyss. Vati claims that the abyss is a wild form of humanity, and that is one way to describe it, but I'm not sure I agree entirely. Anyway, the agents of the abyss, in the form of Kath and Yuria, are deeply untrustworthy, and whatever they egg us on to do is more to serve themselves than humanity at large. We know that hollowing is a result of losing humanity, and that being human is like an opposite of being hollow. In fact, abyssal things might have an ability to bring humans back from the brink of the curse, and make them more human again. An Age of Dark is not the answer, because, like the Firekeeper confirms in Dark Souls 3, tiny flames will dance across the darkness, and the first flame will reignite again. Right, I think that's about all I had to say. I don't want to pretend like I've got all the facts, and I can give you the entire narrative on a silver platter, but I feel like we've gone astray in our discussions about the story of Dark Souls. I just really disagree with some fundamental conclusions people draw from some basic interpretations in the games, and I would like to share my opinion on that. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll be seeing you later.